Welcome to our Bucky call for February 1st or 2nd, depending on what continent you're on. We're on Chapter 7, it was pointed out to me. I knew what page I was on, but Chapter 7, Vector Equilibrium of a Fuller Explanation. So, and there's some really cool pictures coming up, so I'm very excited about this one. Richard, how are you feeling tonight, and what do you anticipate gleaning from this call?
Well, given our earlier discussion, I guess I'm really I'm feeling very despondent, really, in terms of the way in which the new president has been treating not only our country but other countries, and I've been working with colleagues in New Zealand, a woman who spent almost 30 years in a domestic abuse kind of relationship and now has her own company and doing help with others. And so I've become much more familiar in the last few weeks with the whole psychology of domestic violence, but that's just another word for bullying. and so it's just accelerated for me to a higher level. It's now in the hands of the head of a country's family, and I'm doing exactly the same thing in many ways in terms of the dynamics. And I keep looking at both at the domestic level and at the national level now through the principles of tensegrity, and you can really see how tensegrity is at play, and the real tensional dynamic part of the relationship between two or more people or things is being narrowed down to a rigid, no flexibility kind of concept. So, either do what I tell you to do, or I'll just I'll bully you even more until you give up and do what I want. So that's the sad thing. And of course, at the two recent plane crash tragedies, it just breaks your heart to think of what's happened to the families that were lost in the DC plane crash, and then 2 nights or 3 nights later, the family from Mexico that lost their lives in Philadelphia on their way home after their child had just received life-saving surgery or life-saving medical care. So it's not a very joyful sort of weekend in that respect. And so looking forward to reading more into this particular chapter and becoming more and more acquainted with the dynamic of a vector equilibrium. Yeah. So,
Cool.
Anne, how are you feeling, and what's your hopes for this evening, or your lunchtime?
Yes, yeah. I tried to have it before, but sometimes the food comes a little late, so I don't cook. So I will normally order because I'm quite bad at it. Yeah, just to put it out there. Right. I happened to glance at the just the first paragraph, just now while I was opening up the page as well on my side. And I'm really looking forward to the fact that Amy Edmondson says that making it easier to understand, what Fuller talks about, easier to understand. And she says that you will soon find that vector equilibrium is no exception. looking forward to that one, you know. So that's the thing I'm looking forward to. In over here, I think the past it's been 2 months. I think we went through a whole 2 months of overeating. Yeah, really, really overeating. So because you have Christmas and New Year's Eve, right? And then we went straight on into Chinese New Year. It doesn't stop. Every year is like that. But generally the break between New Year, Christmas, and Chinese New Year is more than a month. But I don't know how many years, Chinese New Year is in January. So then we just went from 1 month to another month of eating, and that messes up a lot on our own plans of just staying, so it's on point with our food, right? But it takes a lot to do that. That's one. And actually hearing, I read a little bit about that plane crash and hearing what happened with that family. Yeah, that's, what do you put that down to, right? Doesn't matter what we work on or what we say, what we do, but how do you put that into the whole perspective of the cosmos? Yeah, the whole entire,
of the vector equilibrium.
Okay. All right, I'm interested how that goes into vector equilibrium. Yeah. Anyway, so Steve, how do you feel, and what are you looking forward to taking away today?
Well, I'm excited about my continued study here and the feedback and input that all that you guys provide. And I'm looking forward to that. Joe has something that's detaining me. He can probably make it. We'll see. I hope he does. And there are others who maybe are watching this video because we send it out to a lot of people. So if you're enjoying this as much as I am, that'll be wonderful. I guess the best thing to do here is just to jump in. The topic vector equilibrium just brings up a lot of stuff. So we'll just have to see what happens here. Who would like to read to get us started reading? Let me adjust this first. And then I think I went and finally did a major maintenance thing on my computer. And I think I'm going to be able to operate it successfully. I did a meeting on Wednesday and everything worked. I got the videos quickly. I got the graphics quickly. Let's hope we continue to do that. Who'd like to read tonight?
I can start it.
Okay.
So chapter 7, vector equilibrium. If you begin to suspect that the concepts hiding behind Fuller's intimidating terminology are often easier to understand than their titles, you'll soon find that vector equilibrium is no exception. The vector equilibrium is a omnidirectional equilibrium of forces in which the magnitude of its explosive potentials is exactly matched by the strength of its internal cohering bonds. If Fuller's description doesn't make it crystal clear, read on. The VE, as it is usually called, is truly the cornerstone of synergetics. Vectors are certainly familiar to us by now, but what is meant by equilibrium? The word is by no means esoteric, like systems. It enjoys considerable popularity these days. There is no wonder, for the concept is at the root of all phenomena, both physical and metaphysical. Defined by the American Heritage Dictionary as any condition in which all acting influences are canceled out by others, resulting in a stable, balanced, or unchanging system. Equilibrium is not inactivity, but rather a dynamic balance. This balance is not necessarily physical, but may be mental or emotional as well. In fact, so much of experience is characterized by fluctuation in and out of fragile balances that it is easy to understand the word's frequent use, covering everything from structural to emotional to financial equilibrium. A simple mechanical model of equilibrium involves a ball and a bowl.
Okay.
Allowed to roll around inside the open, smooth surface, a ball will finally come to rest at the bottom of the bowl. The requiring renewed force to set it back in motion, this state is called stable equilibrium. On the outside of an inverted bowl or dome, the ball might rest briefly at the center, but the slightest disturbance will make it roll off, thus demonstrating metastable equilibrium. That's interesting. The third
Metastable, yeah.
possibility, metastable, yeah.
That's okay.
I was thinking of a cancer diagnosis.
Right.
The third possibility is that the ball sits on a flat table in a state of neutral equilibrium. Nature exhibits a fundamental drive towards equilibrium. Scattered pockets of varying temperatures will equalize at the mean temperature. Opposing forces of different magnitude naturally seek a state of rest. These differences cannot remain imbalanced. Greater forces overpower smaller forces, causing motion until they balance out. Demonstrations of this universal tendency are provided by countless everyday experiences. For example, if a massive object sits on too weak a shelf, the force exerted by gravity toward the Earth's center exceeds the strength of the shelf's restraining force, and the object comes crashing through. Motion continues until a new equilibrium is achieved by the object landing on a sturdy floor capable of matching the gravitational force with an equal and opposite restraining force. Apparent motion then ceases as a stable equilibrium is maintained. Invisible motion continues, however, atoms never stand still. The systems approach encourages us to note that we can zoom in to observe the same event on another level of resolution. The front door is opened and quickly closed, allowing a rush of cold winter air into the living room. Freezing temperatures dominate the corner of the room near the door, while the other side of the radiator is cozy and warm. However, the imbalance quickly disappears. The temperature soon becomes more or less consistent throughout the room. Nature's tendency to seek equilibrium is a spontaneous reaction. It is the path of least resistance.
Can we stop here and just chat for a second?
Yeah.
I noticed that Joe has logged in. He's in his car, I think, because I can barely see something moving
Yep.
around.
Yep.
How you doing, Joe?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I was just getting off the train, but happy to be here, and yeah, happy in the part that I actually just heard.
Good.
How there's this idea of spontaneous order. I was actually just reading about how in this book, Atomic Habits, how we actually seek the path of least resistance. And how that's actually a way of, kind of cultivating a habit. But yeah, anyway, it's good to see everybody.
Good. And drive safely, Joe.
Thanks.
Maybe you want to turn off that light. I mean, we love seeing you while you're sharing, but I don't want to jeopardize your status.
I appreciate that.
Good. And I'm glad you're with us. I want to comment about this because first thing hit me that bothered me. I really hate the word. I don't hate the word. I really dislike the way the word balance is being used here, because I think in this book we've gotten the picture, and I'm trying to think where I've heard it because maybe it was in Lafert's cosmometry, but how fast that ball falls off of its plane, whether it's in the bowl or on top of the bowl or on the flat, really depends on the sequence of time in which it is being viewed. In other words, Bucky's big on the fact that there are no things, there are only events. And like like we could argue, well, wait a minute, a building is a thing, but if you were to take time and run a 1,000 years in a 60-second or in a 2-minute model, that building would be come and gone just like that. Bam, bam, it'd be up and down. Even though that building lasted 50 or 100 years, in this concept of 1,000 years, it just is a blip. In the contents of 1,000,000 years, I wonder, it's less than the blink of an eye. And so whatever, and balance seems so permanent. Uh, and people say, well, I want to put my life in balance, which seems so restful. But there is no balance. It's all about equilibrium. It's all about, I would call, alignment in any given moment. And how that alignment works depends on the period of time in which it is perceived by the observer. So I just thought I would bring that up just to be cantankerous, maybe, I suppose. So I'm going to, when I see the word balance, dynamic balance, I'm going to change it to dynamic alignment, realizing that nothing's ever stable and things are just temporarily the way they are. That's my 2 cents. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for me too.
Yeah.
I'm having my troubles with reading this, and my salvation at the moment. The reason I'm having trouble because I'm aligned with chaos theory idea of far from equilibrium being the ideal, which allows for robustness and rest. So it's a little bit like letting the cold air come into the room, and it's cold at the door's entrance and warm over by the heater, but eventually the air kind of disperses around the room and it's warm in all corners. And that to me is an idea of far from equilibrium. In other words, there's motion that moves things around, so you get the heat distributed. But in this one, where he talks about invisible motion continues, however, atoms never stand still.
There you go.
This approach encourages to note that we can zoom in to observe the event on another level of resolution. And to me, that's the very principle of tensegrity, that
Yeah.
that motion, that fluctuation is the tensile, the tensile or tensional in betweenness of one or more, well, two or more events. And so my worry now when I read this one is that it inadvertently, I think, perpetuates the notion of balance that you've just spoken to, Steve, that treats it as a static. And you'll get that like work and home balance is so often talked about, which really means that you have to get it static between home and work. And my best example of a static equilibrium versus a robust equilibrium or dynamic equilibrium is put two little kids on a teeter-totter and get them to come into balance. So they sit on the two ends of the teeter-totter all day in total balance. And then when they get home and the parents say, "How was your day at the playground?" they say, "It was boring. It was awful. I never want to go back there." Then put those same two kids on a teeter-totter and get them sort of bouncing it around. And it goes up and down and in and out, and one of them gets flipped off, scrapes his knee, gets back on, comes home at the end of the day, and the answer to the parents' question is very different. It was great. We want to go back there. It was fun. We had a great day. And that to me is an example of dynamic equilibrium, which is robust and stretches and folds and is energized and rests. And that to me is what vector equilibrium is all about. But this language sometimes, I think inadvertently, tricks us into thinking that equilibrium is this static balance. So that's, I guess if I was talking with Bucky today, I would be arguing with him a little bit about the way he's written this story about the balance in equilibrium.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
can I go ahead.
And he's given you permission to roll.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. I have a problem with the word balance as well. You know, this balance and imbalance, and more because of the way we've done math in you know, like with the way it's been presented to us, what balance is, right? That both sides must be exactly the same, and rather than actually the whole space is the same. That's a whole different ball game altogether. Let me put that into, see if I can put it into words clearly. You know, like say a room, right? You talk about the cold air coming in, and then after that, it kind of becomes equal across the whole room, where the temperature is more or less the same, right? The thing is, you see, there's also, it also has to be factored in that when in a room, if you have more cold air, the room is cooler. You will never ever have one temperature anywhere, correct? So it's like if the room has more cooler air, then the temperature is cooler. But if you have more warm air, then the temperature is warmer. If it's hot air, then you have very little cold air. But the point is that it's like balanced out across the whole room, but then it's not quite you know, the same mix of hot and cold. So the problem right now is that in most people's minds, they think of that the same on both sides. That means equal hot and equal cold. But that's not how the way the world works, right? So the issue for me is that because of this idea of what balance is, it really, really drives me nuts that today a lot of the young people coming out to work, they want this work-life balance, right? And I have a feeling in their head is like the amount of time they spend not working and the amount of time they spend working needs to be the same. No way you can find that, you know. So work-life balance from, you know, like we've been through life where we started work after college, we start working, right? So when you just after school, right, you come out, you don't have so many responsibilities. And then once you find a partner, now you have also your partner to think about, time spent there, and then the partner's family, your own family. Now there are two families to grapple with. When you get married, you have children. Now you have kids in the whole equation, not counting grandparents. And then as everyone gets older, you have your positions in the company will grow as well, because now that also means responsibility, and they expect us to figure out how to help them keep that work-life balance. That means they want all the positions, they want the promotions, they want the responsibilities, but they want to have equal time at home. It is such a difficult thing for me to, and also because they're stressed out, because they have to take care of grandparents who might be needing to go to the hospital, kids unwell. And the expectation is for the workplace to accommodate and help them get that balance. So, and for me, us having gone through having children and sick kids and parents and all that, right? We know balance literally is about whatever we can find the time and the way to be able to keep everything up in the air, you know? And if you're at home, then how do you do the home well? When you're at work, how do you do the work? So, so that's my pet issue with the word balance, you know. So I really, really like the whole idea of this dynamic balance. Maybe there's a video that needs to be done for my team on this, you know. There are those who this is not an issue, but I'm finding a lot of the young ones, and there is a whole movement out there people talking about this work-life balance, and they've become like a whole kind of a group of people trying to push that agenda through, and yet they want to work and grow and be successful at what they do. So that's so I like dynamic equilibrium. And the other one is this. Now that you've gone down this path, the idea of vector equilibrium now becomes a lot more. I'm very, very curious about it now. Okay, even more. Yeah. So Joe, sorry, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be a little bit contrarian here. So what's the opposite of balance then?
Motion.
Yeah, no, but what is it? It's just motion?
No, not just motion. It's a fluctuating or flux.
So, I mean, I look at seeing balance as being part of a dynamic equilibrium. So that's just the way I view it, in the sense that we've talked about this in the past, this idea of you're doing a dance and there's a motion, right? But you have to be balanced in order to actually do the dance. So, I mean, it's not, you do have motion and you are dynamic, but there is balance that's actually involved. Now, in the ways that everybody's articulated it, maybe it's not necessarily always the best word, but I also think about in terms of how balance can be used in terms of even things like justice. So, but you know, that's actually much more conceptual. But I do think in certain ways that it's not totally inappropriate. I don't necessarily. I think some of your critiques are valid, but I don't necessarily look at. I tend to try to think about what the opposite is, and you don't want to be completely out of balance and out of sync, because then there's not necessarily a harmonious relationship. So.
Well, this is the thing. If you look at chaos theory's definition of far from equilibrium, what it talks about is robust. Stretch and fold are the concepts. So it's along the line of what Anne was just talking about too, is that when you're at work, you know, if you're in a really good spot and if the organization is really conducive to your interests and your talents, then you work your butt off and you work hard. But there are times when you need rest, and you need to have space for that rest. So there are times when the workplace has to realize that maybe somebody needs more than one day off for some particular family reason. Maybe sometimes you can expect someone to work 6 or 7 days in a row. So it's to get that dynamic of stretch and fold working in a way that benefits in these examples we're using. It benefits the workplace, and it also benefits the home place. And again, my example.
Well, you're just
hang on a sec. My example that I had in my work was when somebody says, when you come to work at my place, you leave all your personal troubles and issues in the parking lot. They do not come into the workplace. And that's a really, to me, an example of saying we have a definition of balance here that says you can't let that dynamic of your home or personal life come into the workplace when it's impossible to put that kind of demand on somebody. And even if they try and live up to it, at some point, there's probably going to be a breaking point where they can't handle well, basically the kind of thing that Anne was talking about. They've got all these things they're trying to do to make work, and then they've got to go home and make all the things at home work. And at a time, if there's not a give and take between the two, then one is going to give, one's going to break. You're either going to be told at work that you're not doing your job and you have to leave, or you're feeling stressed out at home and you have a burnout problem. So that's how I'm getting that balance, as being something more than that sort of equal forces creating a sort of a stable place. It needs the movement or the motion or the flux.
So balance would still exist at a particular level. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. I want to say that
Rest can exist.
But what I'm saying is that balance still exists, meaning through the particular, you're using an example of somebody that maybe
it's a dynamic
somebody that can, so balance may not be the same for each individual, right? But it's still a component of what. And anyway, I'm just trying to get the opposite of what balance is, and I don't necessarily think it's just motion. I think it's actually out of balance.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I walked away from it being just motion.
Okay.
And
It's closer to fluctuation, oscillation, that kind of motion.
So
Sorry.
So I'm thinking static. You're thinking balance is static, and that's not necessarily the opposite of mine.
Okay. Actually, I'll make my point clearer here. It's that what the issue is that people think of balance as static. That's my issue, but it is not. It's not.
Right.
You see, there are days where you feel like horrible at work, right? And you feel like you're getting nowhere with it. And then on other days you can have good days, but then you don't. And on the day where you feel like you're not getting anywhere, people are thinking, okay, maybe it's burnout. But then on other days where it's okay, this whole idea of burning out doesn't even come forth. So my point is, we all fluctuate in our work, right? And the problem is that people are thinking of this static balance. Okay, like just it's equal and it doesn't change. It should not change. But then life is dynamic, and therefore and the balance can show up in different ways. So you can even be very, very hectic at work. Things are hectic at work. At home, things are also hectic. But if you can sort it out and you can get the thing done, at home you can get the thing done. Yes, you can be pretty exhausted at the end of it, but then the next day you could have some time to catch up on the rest. So it is more like adjusting to the whole dynamics of it. It's when people expect that, I should be able to do both things like in a very relaxed manner, and there's no way that can happen. That's my point. Yeah. So there's chaos, there is balance, and the balance can be balanced up here, or the balance can happen down here. It can be even balance that's out of completely, like if your life is, analogy wise, is in a jar, and suddenly on that day you're out of that jar, and you need to find that balance up there too. So it literally shifts, and that's why I like the idea of the dynamic. So it doesn't mean that there is no balance. There is balance, just that you gotta find it, and the balance in a day or even an hour, you literally may have to figure out the balance as it changes. Yeah. So
yeah, I agree with that.
So anyway, I really love the direction just talking about balance, where it's taking us.
Richard, we can't see your video. I don't know if that's on purpose.
No, it's I've been having trouble all day, and so I'm
cool. So as long as you're working on it,
I may come back on the phone.
Cool. I want to say that I appreciate Joe for struggling with the word and saying there might be a purpose for the word balance. But I'm going to go with Anne because to me, the whole concept of balance is a total illusion. And if I think that I can create balance like Lady Justice standing there with equal weights on either side, and I'm looking at non-movement now. When I perceive this kind of balance, I'm looking at no differential. But if I change let's say instead of putting 2 pounds on one side of Lady Justice, and you put 2 pounds on the other side, let's say that you put a cubic inch of iron on one side of Lady Justice, and you put a cubic inch of gold on one side of Lady Justice. Bam! That thing, the statue is going to go out of balance, but it's in total equilibrium. It's in total alignment. And I think that too many times, to go along with Anne's idea, is that people think balance is non-movement. It's being able to identify
Well, right.
all of
I
the
agree with
things going on in the room, where I should not be I shouldn't be looking for no movement. I shouldn't be, and I like the idea of temperature. Thank you, Joe. And if you want to talk in a second, you can go for it. I like the idea of temperature because as Ann pointed out, if I can say, well, the room is 78 degrees, but if I took my temperature on and I measured every cubic inch in this room, and so I put up there 1.4 million temperature readings in this room, they are not going to all be 74 degrees, just like Ann said. Some are going to be hotter and some are going to be cooler. And if anybody doesn't understand this principle, all you got to do is go get in the ocean, sit in the ocean, and you'll experience the temperature of the water, and all of a sudden a wave goes through, and that wave is either very cold or very warm. Water, there's an alignment that creates an equilibrium. Balance is an illusion. I have one more thing to say, but Joe, if you want to, and I think what I'm saying, my point is that the word balance has such a connotation that it's not helpful. That there are some words in my language that shut my brain down, and the word balance shuts my brain down. And I think the word alignment, where I realize that everything is in motion everywhere, and if I can maintain some kind of equilibrium, like if I'm a surfer on a wave, um, I look like in perfect balance. I'm in equilibrium with all of the vectors in that wave and all the vectors in my board and all the vectors in my body as I shift my weight from here to there. There's no such thing as balance. It's total alignment. It's dynamic alignment. So, there's my rant, Joe. Do you want to say anything to that?
No, I mean, I would just, come back with this idea that, that I think treating balance as static is problematic. But
Agreed.
so that part I'm in agreement with, but to say that balance doesn't exist, I'm not saying that it's not really hard to achieve, but that I believe it exists, and there's a dynamic balance, or if you will, and so that's where I'm not taking the opposite to be just static.
Yeah.
That's all.
So I'm going.
But alignment is, I do appreciate alignment.
Good. And I'm just going to say that coming back to my original point about Bucky with there are no things, at any time that
that's good.
if I perceive anything in imbalance, all I have to do is broaden my time window. And that thing is not in balance. Any time I perceive balance, it's totally a local event and it's totally subjective. Because if I increase the window of time, that building that I thought was so steady, I can see it wiggling in the wind. I can see it wiggling in an earthquake. I can see it get add-ons, and then I can see it get destructed. And so, I might say, well, that building is in balance, but that's because my local window is so limited. And if I'm going to live in a world today of where everything changes so quickly, and with AI coming, no one knows what the future is going to be like in 5 years. And if I think that I can create balance that is some kind of static, kind of like controllable environment, I'm deceiving myself, and I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to hurt my family. I'm going to hurt my economy. I'm going to hurt my country. So I want to be, there's that little argument.
I agree. In fact, and I agree with the idea that it's local.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point, and that was kind of the point what I was thinking with even the example of the employee, that there's one employee that needs this amount of time in order to have balance in their life because they have outside demands, whereas another employee may have a different amount of time necessary based on the demands of their life. So therefore, it is a local event. So that much I'm in agreement with.
Yeah. It's a local event, and it's contained in a time frame that's relative to the observer. So, and if I widen my time frame, I become more omnipresent. I become more omniscient. I become actually more omnipotent, because now I can anticipate that what I thought was static balance is actually just a passing, fleeting moment in
Yes.
in a given local situation. And we're about to talk about entropy in the next picture here. So she's going to be explaining some other element. If you're complete on that, I want to bring up one more thing, Joe. Did you hear anything
I am.
else? Okay, good. So another thing that hit me, this idea of locality and the idea of my objective window. If I look at the relationship, I'm going to share a screen here, which anybody's invited to share. All you have to do to share is just start sharing. But this sheet is one of my favorite sheets, and up here in the third column, we see the formula n squared minus n over 2. So this is the formula where we actually Bucky gives us to determine the number of edges on a polyhedron, or the number of relationships in an event. The more nodes I have in the event, the more relationships I have. If I have one node in the event, if you follow down on the table, it's 1 squared minus 1. So 1 squared minus 1 is 1, minus 1 is 0. And you can't divide 2 by a 0. If you go down to 2 nodes, or 2 particular aspects of an event, n squared is 4 minus n is 2, divided by 2 is 1, etc., and so on. When we get down to where there are 4 nodes, which is the tetrahedron, we get, n is 4, squared is 16, minus 4 is 12, divided by 2 is 6. And what I'm doing there is I'm describing events. I'm describing edges on a polyhedron. That's all this formula is doing. And I've come to this big vision, especially hearing you guys talk, that this has nothing to do with life. If I want to talk about life and relations of people, I cannot divide it by 2. Because if I just say there are 2 people involved in this thing and there's only one relationship, I'm only looking at the relationship of A to B, as shown here on the chart. What about the relationship of B to A?
Right.
Because I can be a boss, I can be A, and I can tell B to turn your head sideways. But if B has a broken neck, it's impossible. And most people manage their lives with this kind of stable edge idea. But there is no stable edge. The edges are volatile, they're dynamic, and they work from A to B, and they work from B to A. And A to B and B to A is not always what you would call balanced.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an illusion with balance.
Yeah.
And
That's it. May I?
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point. Let me say, but could you say that one person, if you look at it from A to B and B to A, they balance each other out?
Not if I'm the boss. Not if I'm the boss and you're getting paid $12 an hour.
Well, I mean, that's would be out of balance. And
well,
so
that's life.
So, but I'm not saying that. But there is a balance to be had. Like in a relationship, let's just say you're dating.
Yeah.
Or dating.
But I would call it a dynamic alignment. Go ahead.
Well, and look, and I'd be willing to say, and I was just thinking about this. It's if you're out of alignment.
Yeah.
Right. That is, that if you're out of balance, and I'm just saying that those are similar ideas. Alignment, I grant you that it may, in certain cases, not all, would resonate better But I still think that when I'm thinking about balance, that even if, again, if you're in a relationship, the other person balances the other individual out. Their strengths and their weaknesses complement one another. It may not even be equal,
That's right.
but it will be balanced.
See, I
Yeah.
like complementary.
Yes.
Complementary is like alignment to me. Complementary does not insinuate or indicate in any way that there's an equality. It represents an alignment because in a relationship with another person, I might be dominant in one aspect, but move to another aspect in the relationship, and the other person might be dominant. There's no balance there, but there's total alignment. And I can say there's balance. I can put up a formula and create an artificial reality where in a local situation over a specific period of time, I can say, yep, there's zero, no momentum, there's no vector, there's no movement at all here. And it's an illusion. All I got to do is expand my window of time. Anyway, I've made that point. Anne, did you have something you wanted to say? I thought I.
Yeah, I was more thinking because I actually am quite happy because Joe, when you threw that into the whole discussion, right? It got, for me, what it did was it got me thinking about maybe what I was trying to say was not inclusive. It wasn't inclusive. So it allowed me to look at what I was saying before and to make it clearer for even myself, right, as to what this whole balance and that what even dynamic balance means. So I liked it. I really liked it a lot when you threw in the opposite of balance and what that is. And actually, yeah, what is the opposite of balance? Like straight off, we're gonna say unbalanced or imbalanced, but then there's also motion. There's all this to think about, right? So I just want to say that I liked it. I really liked it a lot when you threw that in and got us going into this whole discussion on it. Perfect. I loved it. And now the fact you're going down the path, Steve, on complementary and alignment, and yeah, let's take it wherever it goes.
I love it. And Richard has his hand up. I'm going to let Richard go for it. But it seems to me that what we're doing here is we're creating a perfect outline for your presentation to your staff. We're talking about every possibility, and you're going to hear every argument. Thanks to Joe, you're going to hear every argument that your staff is going to give you because there, I mean, practically speaking, the word balance has a place in our culture. But
Right.
if I'm a leader and if I'm, maybe it's not. Richard, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the formula that you were looking at, and it is such an important formula, and when you just use the tetrahedron as an example, and you end up with the formula, and you discover there's 6 edges or 6 interconnections, which makes sense if you're looking at a physical object, let's say. So you can count there's 6 lines that connect those 4 dots. But as you say, when you move that into a social dynamic or a social relationship where you have people, and again, just thinking of if you've got 4 people interacting with each other, especially if they're interacting in the Bohmian dialogue sort of way, then the denominator 2 has to be removed. Because it is a back and forth. It is, you say, A, B, B, A, and so forth. And so it gives you another appreciation of just how complex human interactions are. Because
Right.
now, if we're talking about 4 people instead of just 4 things connected, we're really going to get rid of the divisor, and that 6 is going to turn into 12, which is minimum. And so you very quickly see how the number of the potential interrelationship dynamics that one has to deal with between A's and B's and B's and A's and C's and D's and so forth becomes very complex very quickly. And that's life. that's what we're all dealing with. And what my trouble with balance, when I think about it in a tensegrity basis, is that balance so often is more equated with the compression part of tensegrity. It's sort of like that brick wall, that heavy weight, and it's static. It's going to hold the building up, and it forgets the attentional part, which is what is in the chapter that we just read, that it forgets that the atoms are always moving, which to me says attentional connections are always at play. And it's not just compression, it's compression and tension all the time.
Right.
And that gives you this dynamical sort of notion of balance, as opposed to the compression notion of balance. That to me is how I'm distinguishing the reference to how balance is used in general sort of thought, and it's more of a compression type balance, so that it's kind of holds its place, whereas tensegrity speaks to a more fluctuating, dancing, weaving kind of balance.
Well, it's a both and. So they're not like, so but balance still exists. I mean, but it's part of a dynamic relationship.
You won't give up on it, will you?
Yeah, he's not giving up. He's not giving up. And Anne loves it because she's getting all this food for her presentation. And I think maybe Joe could be slightly distracted because he's driving, and that might be one of the reasons why he's being so persistent. But I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying.
No. I mean, it's something where I see what you're saying. I'm just saying that I just even think of things. I don't discount the word balance.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Is that and I do understand it's local, and I understand that it's also when you introduce the idea of time, that's another interesting aspect of it. Because even if I look at the idea of a balance sheet, that's a snapshot in time, right? And so it's at a particular moment in time, related to a particular entity, and so then you're looking at it, or there's that balance, but it's not necessarily reflective of reality, because reality is that something is already happening outside of that. So it's just a snapshot over a period. So from that perspective, but balance still works. I mean, there's still a balance sheet. Anyway.
Yeah, Joe, I really like the balance sheet. I'm writing it down now because you're right. It's a snapshot of that moment, right? Because it can be balanced. It can be balanced and very, very profitable, but it can also be balanced when you are completely making losses. You see, so it's up and down, but it still has to balance, right? And then the balance when it shows up today, and the balance tomorrow, and the balance at the end of the year, they're different, right? Yeah.
Right.
So perfect. I love it. I can use that
And
as
it really
an
is
analogy.
good, Joe. The balance sheet is really
Love
a
it.
great local phenomenon that creates, if anybody believes that balance sheet is not just a snapshot in time, they're going to screw themselves.
Right.
Yes.
So it's beautiful, a great paradigm, Joe. I'm so glad that and I noticed you've pulled over and you're very focused right now.
Yeah, no, I'm about to get out of the car, but yeah, no, but and even in terms of, I'll just say in life, it's trying to look at, what are you bringing, and what are you taking?
Yeah.
So,
Well, now that leads into my next topic. Are you clear?
now I'm clear.
All right, folks, I'm going to indulge myself here because in my book, Extreme Mindfulness, I'm actually focusing on one of these aspects. And I want to come back to the relationship formula from Bucky, where Richard reaffirmed that, yeah, this here's formula, n squared minus n over 2, does define the number of edges in a relationship. This actually only represents the number of potential um, aspects of a relationship. And let me point out what I'm saying. Let's take the simple idea of this AB relationship. The formula would show n squared minus n over 2 is a 1. I would say take off the divide by 2 because there are two relationships happening here, whether we're conscious of it or not. There's A to B, as Richard reaffirmed. There's A to B, and then there's B to A. We sometimes would we might conceive this as a convex and then concave aspects of a relationship. Although you might think that, oh, well, that looks like a circle because I'm in the but it's not, because we look at Bucky's circles of irrelevancies. This is actually the circles are 2D, but those circles are actually spheres, and those spheres are in a four-dimensional context, which is tetrahedral. So it's much more complicated. Let me take it one level. Let's say person A is relating to person B, and we're now looking at A to B relationship. The question is, what energy does A bring to B? And if I look at a human being and I look at Joe Dispenza's energy centers, now I can get as airy-fairy on this as I want to get. But let's just take two elements. Let's take right brain and left brain. Let's take logical thinking and emotional thinking or creative thinking. So actually, A has two elements here to bring to the party. And B has two elements to bring to the party. So now suddenly these two people, A and B, are actually dealing with four different aspects that now we got a tetrahedron. And every one of those, it's a hypergraph. A tetrahedron is a four-dimensional hypergraph where every point, every node in the relationship is related to every other node in the relationship. So we suddenly, just because we're thinking left brain, right brain, we automatically move from a two-node relationship to a four-node relationship. Now, human beings just aren't left brain and right brain. Some are more physically oriented. This would be the root chakra, the root energy center. Some are more transitionally oriented. This would be the sacral energy center. Some are more freedom choice oriented. That'd be the solar plexus area. Some are more heartfelt. And so that's the heart, that's the compassionate. Compassion rules everything. It's DEI all the way. And then there's the throat energy. Who's able to speak? Who's more verbal? Who's more clear in their communication? Then we go to the sixth chakra, the sixth energy center, which is the third eye, or the ability to envision and imagine, the imagination. And then there's the crown chakra, or the top chakra, where I'm connected to heaven, where I'm more I don't know, you might call that the ultimate creative energy. So as a human being, I potentially bring seven energies into a conversation. Seven energies. And now all of a sudden, I go from A to B. There's seven A's relating to seven B's. Good grief. We're down here now to 21 interrelate, because there are seven elements. There are 21 relationships going on, and that's if I cut it in two. There's actually 42 elements here going on in this relationship. If I cut it in half, then I'm saying the boss takes their seven energies and throws it at the seven energies of the $12 an hour person. But if I'm in a more of a team spirit where I'm being creative and I'm relying on my team to produce, I want them to bring all of those energies. So now we're at 7 and 7. We're at 14. 14 squared is whatever number minus 14, and then we can divide that by 2 maybe if we want to. I'm just saying life is there is less balance on this planet than anybody thinks is possible. Everything is total chaos, and I'm planning on Richard supporting me in the chaos theory aspect. No, this has been really great, you guys. Thank you for allowing me to rant and rave about my book.
About this is that, and we need to go back to Bucky saying that those figures are just minimum. So as you say, as soon as you add in the 7, chakras as an example, and just relate it to yourself, then those 7 interact with each other in that formula way. But if you add the 7 that's in somebody else and you're in communication, then you have you can take the divisor way. And then the other thing that I finally figured out about that formula that ends up making more sense to me is that when you work that formula out, it will end up being n times, in brackets, n minus 1. So it'll be 4 times n minus 1, which is 3. It's just simple. 4 times 3 equals 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. If you had the interaction going, minimum between 2 people, let's say, then you take away the denominator and you get 12. So there's 12 possible interconnections going on. But I really like the formula when it's expressed in how many ends do you have? You can count them, 4. And instead of having to go through squaring one end and then minusing an n, you just simply say n, whatever that number is, times n minus 1. And so if you've got 6, it's 6 times 5. If you've got 7, it's 7 times 6. And very quickly you get the answer to the number of interconnections, the minimum number of interconnections. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to try this out as well. Okay, I'm going to try this out. So technically, the formula is based on the physical connection, right? You can see. So then because the other part of the world is also the metaphysical part, which is encompassing of the physical part, right? So then the formula, will change definitely when you take the metaphysical part. Then I guess that's because human nature is so complicated, and that there's also then if you take quantum into an equation, then it changes everything as well. Would that?
Yeah, I mean that's why it's so important to, and that's why I get caught up in the language of simple and complicated, and the language of simplex and complex. And I'm now leaning more and more into the alignment between the x's, the simplex and the complex, versus the alignment between simple and complicated. And sometimes we cross them over in a way that probably isn't very helpful, because we think, if we think the tetrahedron, if you want, is simple, which it is in many ways, but it's still complex. It's 4 things interacting 6 different ways. So to me, that's a simplex, minimum simplex. And then when you start unfolding it out, then you see complex and complexity, and then you really begin to see just how complex it is, even in and in a classroom of kids and teacher. How many kids are in the classroom? Roughly
25 for the older ones.
Yeah, say 25, and add a teacher is 26. And then just multiply 26 times 25, and you can see how much chaos, if you want, or a complexity is in that room. And in the same way as you often mentioned, if you've got little kids that are just coming to school for the first time, and they're supposed to sit at a table and be quiet and listen to the teacher, well, common sense tell you that's an impossible sort of demand to put on a little kid, to make them sit still. And so what you want is the interaction, about 26 times 25 that's going on in that room. So really you should come into a room of school kids, and the place should look chaotic. Yeah, because everybody is enjoying themselves or trying to learn at a different pace, and the teacher and the kids are all interacting with each other in any number of those 26 times 25 ways. And that, I mean, I think I've told this before, but when I use this number to help people figure out how many relationships they were handling in life, and so I got people to count the kind of thing that uh, Steve was just doing, only I just did it in terms of years of biological self, psychological self, spiritual self, etc. So 4. And then we looked at 4 or 5 key beliefs, and you went around the corner, the 4 points, and you got, say, well, quite a large number. But I did it with this one person, and when we did the formula, the number came out quite high, and she was coming to counseling for 1 or 2 problems that were really difficult to try and solve. So when I gave her the number, her instant response to me was, "No wonder I wake up in the morning with a headache." And what it was doing, she was now justifying her headache. She said, "I have a right to that headache." And then when we saw the big number, and there's only 2 of them that are causing her trouble, then you could flip it over and say, "Well, look how well you're really doing with all those other relationships." And it's just these 2 that are kind of out of whack. And so you talk about balance, then you got a better balance in terms of, life isn't all that bad in terms of your performance. You're actually doing quite well with a lot of things.
Well, cool. I've got one more rant I want to go on. Everybody complete
Yeah,
so far?
love
Okay.
the rants.
Okay, good. So I put a chat, I posted in the chat there, I said, because how many relationships, how many nodes does a person bring to the conversation or to the event, right? How many nodes? So this is a song from Sting, and it's really cool. The song is called All Four Seasons, and the part of the lyric, and I put the link to the actual song down below. When I do my workshops, people love music, and that's a great way to involve people in what's going
Yeah,
on. Here's the lyrics. How will I know? Um, a- and that a relationship, it was wrong. It should have been up there. So delete a relationship. How can I tell which side of the bed she takes when the day begins? Can she be kind? Or she can be kind, she can be cruel. She's got me guessing like a game show fool. She can change her mind like she changes her sweaters. From one minute to the next, it's hard to tell. She blows hot and cold, just like stormy weather. She's my gift from the Lord or a friend from hell. That's my baby. She can be all 4 seasons in one day. So that's kind of a fun little thing. Now, regarding to take it one step further, you guys, I'm putting this in my book, and this may or may not be helpful. It certainly is fun for me. So let me just throw this out here. In the chat, I've now put down how many nodes a person brings to the conversation or to the event. And I've talked about 7 energy centers. I like the word energy centers more than chakras. Dr. Joe Dispenza uses energy centers. Chakras is kind of new agey, and people go, "Oh, this is just hokey pokey stuff."
yeah.
So when you say energy centers, people relate to that. What energy are you bringing today? And these are the 7 energy centers. Starting from the bottom, the root energy center is the physical or the direct approach. This can be just about DNA and what physical attributes does this person bring? Are they a tall person, a short person? Are they a strong person, weak person? This can be about survival. This is it. It's physical. It could be about survival. It could just be about growth. The next level is the sacral level. I'm looking for a non woo-woo name about that sacral chakra, but it's about nurturing. And in nurturing, there's assimilation and there's rejection. And so if I'm in my sacral energy, I'm either assimilating what's going on or I'm flat out rejecting it, or somewhere in between. Then there's the solar plexus. I'd like to get another name for this, but this basically has to do with choice. This is the ability to choose. And this has to do with risk taking. Some people are willing to take risks, other people are not willing to take risks. This is actually my first time jamming this out in a long time, you guys. So I'm going to look at it. I have a big article I wrote over here 3 years ago that's going to be in my book, but I'm not there. I'm off doing something else. So the next is the heart center. The fourth chakra is the heart center, which is about compassion and inclusion. Then the fifth is about vocal skills. That's the throat chakra. It's about vocal skills. Do I have the ability to speak the truth? Do I even know the truth to speak it? And do I lie to myself? You and I know as leaders, we see people lying to themselves all the time. They say, oh, I'm going to do that. You know they're not going to do that. But they really believe they're going to do that in that moment. What is this person's ability to actually speak the truth of their own experience or speak the truth of any event? Then the sixth level is this third eye chakra. That's the visionary. In other words, what are the possibilities over time? This is where we go from that snapshot in time on the balance sheet to bammo. Okay, we really want to, that balance sheet shows us, but we can really grow this business in 5 years, except AI is coming in. But now I move to the sixth thing, the visionary. AI is coming in. This business I'm in right now won't be here in 5 years, right? Because I've moved to a wider perspective. I've broadened. We measure an event, and there are two rulers we use. This is Eric Weinstein talking. We use space as a measure for event. So we use a ruler, like how many inches, how big is it? But we also use time as a measure of an event, and time has a different ruler. So I thought I would bring that in because we talked about time and event making things local. And then finally, the seventh chakra is this connection to heaven, or it's the ultimate purpose of the thing. Do we even want to be in this business at all? What's the ultimate purpose of this thing? And now, if I look at the ultimate purpose, I can go back through it maybe and create not a balance, but an alignment of all the other energies, you know? Okay, because they're going to be timing. So anyway, there's some ideas, you guys. Thank you for letting me share.
I really
Okay,
like that. I really like that. I
good.
like your energy centers.
I have a lot more on this because I had a vision one night in one of my meditations. I sat for an hour one night, and I saw how the root chakra is is a polar dual of the grand design of seven. That the earth is connected to heaven. There is no earth without heaven. And then moving in, the sacral chakra is polar or a toroid with the visionary chakra. So there's this nurturing going on, this tribal energy going on in the sacral area, but the visionary is the universal tribe. You know, do I want to stay in my little tribe in my little village forever, or do I want to join a bigger tribe and have a bigger effect? And then the next, the solar plexus is absolutely in polar connection, a toroidal connection with heart. I mean, with vocal, because my ability to choose and take risks depends a lot on my ability to speak, because maybe I can ask for permission, maybe I can describe the circumstances, maybe I can use my voice to get feedback, and that feedback and voice now gives me more courage to take the risk, or it gives me more wisdom to not take the risk. So there is a toroidal relationship between 1 and 7, 2 and 5, 3 and um, I'm sorry, 1 and 7, 2 and 6, 3 and 5. And the heart center feeds it all. The heart center feeds it all. If the heart's not operating, the entity dies. So there again, it creates an alignment. And one way to look at this, you guys, is like an hourglass. So 765 comes down a funnel to the heart, and 321 goes out like a reverse funnel on the bottom. And that somehow the heart creates this dynamic toroidal. It's all a giant torus. It's all a giant torus, 5 through 7, and it's just a giant energy, swirling energy. There's little energies in each one. There are dual relationships between the ones I've described, and then there's the whole thing. This is precession. This is Bucky's. Everything is in energy, everything is in motion, and this, orbit, Soviet peace, spin, orbit, spin and reverse spin, orbit and reverse orbit. Vectors are involved in that, in and out, expansion and inspansion. torque and reverse torque in the context of bodies in motion against bodies in motion. I just went down through my little memory peg on
Right.
precession. So
And I just checked it. You're right
oh, good.
with my
So,
memory. I've spotted.
yeah, because you have your memory peg too as well, huh, Richard? Really
Yeah.
good. Well,
Well,
that's fun. Go
just to
ahead.
stay on that for a minute. I mean, this is the whole thing too that's starting to happen, I think, in terms of the body and the heart. The heart
Yes.
has always been treated as synonymous with a pump. It's a machine. We're now discovering that that's not true. It's
Yeah.
it's more toroidal, or it's tensegral.
Yes.
It has to do with um, again, the dynamics of compression and tension working together.
Exactly.
So so there's a whole bunch of things I think now are starting to unfold, is where we're moving away from the machine metaphors to explain the functions of the body or the functions of our relationships with each other. And we're
Cool. And may I say that not only is everything you said is absolutely true, but because it is pumping, it's charged with electricity. That electricity is what makes it go. And anything with electricity pumping like that creates an electromagnetic field. And scientists have been able to measure the electromagnetic field of the heart between 3 to 6 feet away from the human body. Actually measure it, electromagnetically measure it. So it's not only, the last thing it is, Richard, is a machine. It's a living, breathing organism that has an equilibrium that hopefully it goes in and out of balance to create life.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. Again, that we get into the playing with words, but
Right.
it's more pulsating than it is pumping.
Yeah.
But it's creating the same sort of effect.
Right.
It's just that we've been using what turns out to maybe be the wrong metaphor as we become more conscious of the non-mechanicalism of the universe,
Of the
or at least
universe.
maybe not so much the non-mechanicalism, but it's um, the non-exclusivity of the machine metaphor, and that it has its place. It makes sense to see something operate like a machine supposed to operate. And it makes sense sometimes to use machine metaphors to explain some other kind of behavior. But I think we're moving away from it now, that we have more ways to put things into some kind of metaphor form in order to help with understanding.
Wonderful. I've talked a lot. Any other comments or questions?
No, that was actually really nice to listen to, though.
I'll tell you, Ann, you have got some fodder for a great presentation. I'd love to see what you do with it. I love the balance sheet thing. That's blowing my mind. Because it's so practical and it's so poignant. And yeah, wonderful thing.
Yeah, I was actually pretty pumped about that. Actually, I just came up with it, so.
Yeah, good for you. It's real. You were losing the argument until then, Joe.
I'm glad to hear that, actually. It's I needed to redeem myself.
You needed to bring some balance to the conversation, Joe, and you
Exactly.
did it with the
Somehow I'm
balance
going
sheet.
to, somehow.
And he also reminded me that I'm a treasurer of an organization, and we have a board meeting on Wednesday, and I have to present the balance sheet.
Yeah.
With any luck, you won't distract yourself with any further conversations as we have tonight.
Right.
And so
Okay.
the opposite of a balance sheet would be Enron.
There you go.
Right.
For those of us who know what Enron was. Yeah. I love it. Any other comments or questions? We've got a few more minutes. We can maybe, let me see, where are we? We're at
12:34.
Yeah, we're at I think we left off at nature's tendency to seek equilibriums of spontaneous reaction It is the path of least resistance. I think that's where we left off.
Yeah.
And so we can, yeah, we can read a couple more paragraphs. We'll stop at nature's own geometry so we can finish this topic. Who cares to read?
Okay, I'll take it on.
Okay.
We have already seen that vectors model certain events and reactions of nature. In this discussion, we focus on one specific use of vectors to represent forces. The application is straightforward. Forces push or pull on something. The strength or magnitude of a force is represented by the length of the vector, and its direction is, of course, specified by the orientation, frequency, and angle, as Bucky says. Okay.
I'll click, and we're there. There we go.
It follows then that a balance of forces is geometrically modelable. We can create a spatial diagram of the concept of equilibrium, and in doing so, learn more about space's inherent symmetry. Bucky's love affair with vectors dates back to his World War I Navy experience. Introduced to vector diagrams of colliding ships in the officers' training program, he discovered that the tiny arrows contained all the necessary information about the ship's masses and speeds, and compass headings to predict the results of collisions or the effect of tailwinds and other influential forces. Bucky was fascinated by the economical elegance of the system. These vectors actually modeled the energetic events of reality, a pleasant contrast to the mathematics teacher's lines stretching to infinity. Bucky was hooked. He reminisces in a 1975 videotaped lecture. A vector is an experience, so I thought, if I could only have a geometry of vectors, that would be great. This concept was introduced in the previous chapter, but now we must discern the specific shape of the configuration generated by vector diagrams and models.
Wow. Any comments or questions on that?
No, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is just trim tab. Every time I see, every time they talk about Bucky's experience in the Navy, but obviously, just understanding how the ship's dynamics work, and understanding how energy events work and in reality, and how he was able to make a tiny change that made a tremendous impact.
Beautiful. One other thing that's happening in current times is that when Elon Musk started doing his self-driving cars, he was using cameras, infrared, visual cameras, and then trying to get the computer to weigh all of that to create a self-driving car. They gave it up. They threw it away. And what they've done is what his computer does is it converts every object on the road, including, this goes right back to Bucky's thing here, including the wind, whatever, turns them all into vectors, and the computer drives the car by analyzing the vectors. So, and I've said this before, but if I'm driving on a car, I might see a building on the left-hand side of the road that's as big as that Mack truck over on the right-hand side of the road. But I also know the building isn't going anywhere, and the Mack truck has direction. And I can tell by the sound of the engine or by the speed, my brain calculates the vector of that truck and determines whether I can make it through that intersection before that truck does. And that's how the brain works. That's how Elon Musk is doing his self-driving cars. Any other comments or questions? I think we
Do you have a video about that explains that?
Yeah, there's a really cool podcast where the engineer at Tesla is explaining how they dropped all their visual stuff and went to vectors. I'll look for it.
I appreciate that.
The other thing in that quote, if you substitute some other words, so a vector is an experience. So I thought if I could only have a geometry of vectors, that would be great. Well, when we know now that so many people focus on the entity of something or the compression and not the tension part, he's really saying, if I could only have a geometry of connections or a geometry of relationships instead of a geometry of things.
Yeah.
And what a difference that would make if we had a geometry of vectors in the way in which that's being talked about, because that really is saying that we would have if you want, for me anyway, we would have if you want a geometry of tensegrity, or we would have a tensegral geometry, and the vector would become a more critical component of that combination, and help us move away from the emphasis on the compression side, the brick wall kind of idea of building something, as opposed to the cable tension part in a suspension bridge or in the anatomy of bones and ligaments.
And
Yeah.
that goes back to Richard. That goes back to your and I our discussion a couple weeks ago about the human biology, the tension between the tendons and the bones, and
Yeah,
how you can't, if you try to, if one builds something brick by brick and block by block, it takes massive more energy and is less stable than if one will be sensitive to the relationships and allow things to interrelate. And the result is it compounds. It isn't a linear relationship. It's the
right.
more you get, the better you got.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, it's well, it's just yeah. The idea of, I think of personalized medicine actually, and how you're actually able to measure events, and not just the entity, not just the individual. So you're actually able to capture the dynamic experience of an individual. Whereas, yeah, you're not just treating just the entity, as Richard was saying. So it's not just treating, like looking at it as from a compression perspective. It's capturing the dynamicism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, any other comments or questions? Okay, let's proceed. I think we got a few minutes here. We've been sharing a lot. Let's we'll be done by the next page. So who wants to read?
I'll give it, I can go ahead. We
Okay.
periodically remind ourselves of the purpose behind this geometric journey. Trying to faithfully trace Bucky's footsteps, we seek to isolate the coordinate system of nature, how the universe is organized. One of the essential parts of the mystery is how to account for structural similarities between the total unrelated phenomena, vastly different in both scale and material. The implication is that rather than being coordinated, things coordinate themselves. This self-organization occurs according to a set of physical forces or constraints, absolutely independent of scale or specific interactive forces. In short, space shapes all that inhabits it. But how? Through what vehicles does nature adhere to this underlying order? Let's look at Fuller's fundamental operating assumption. It is a hypothesis of synergetics that forces in both macrocosmic and microcosmic structures interact in the same way, moving toward the most economic equilibrium by embracing all the energetic phenomena of it. Total physical experience, synergetics provides for a single coherent system of geometric principle.
Comments or questions?
No, I mean, I think that that's really interesting, from a lot of different perspectives, but I'll keep going, but I can come back to that. Now, synergetics seeks to establish the natural laws through which the self-organization of systems in the most diverse fields of science occurs. Science, as we noted earlier, acknowledges a fundamental drive toward equilibrium. But what else can be observed about this tendency?
Okay, are we okay? Does anybody need to leave sharp at the top of the hour? Can we go a couple minutes over? Okay. I can't see you, Richard. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is I do want to spend, I mean, I do want to,
We will.
could come
We'll
back
have
to
good
this.
takeaways. We'll have good takeaways.
Okay. Well, I
We
mean,
only got one more
I mean,
paragraph
I
to
just
read.
want to make sure we cover entropy, give it enough time, so maybe we could start with it next week as well. I can
If we
stay
need to.
past there.
Okay.
Entropy closed container experiment. Gas molecules buzzing around in a closed container are suddenly allowed, but the removal of a barrier into an adjacent empty compartment of the same size, the molecules rapidly disperse, taking advantage of their own new freedom by using the additional room to spread out and slow down. The reverse action of all the gas molecules suddenly gathering in one half of a container has never been observed, just as in the living room disparate temperatures equalize. But that room will never spontaneously become warm on one side while the other side suddenly cools off. The closed container experiment is the classic model for illustrating nature's entropic tendencies. The Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, 1844 to 1906, noted for his work in entropy theory, called the resulting dispersal disorderly behavior. A geometer, however, might observe the individual gas molecules vying for the most room, accomplished, of course, by a maximally symmetrical distribution, and not perceive such a progression as disorder. Both perceptions call it equilibrium.
Cool. We finished the section. What did you want to say about entropy, Joe?
Oh, no,
You
I mean,
think-
I was actually going to comment basically on the idea of spontaneous order. That was actually talking about the path of least resistance, where we were talking about that a little bit earlier.
Okay.
And sometimes, I mean, whenever I just think about spontaneous, any kind of spontaneous order, I just think about it in terms of in economics. So, the idea that there is this kind of order that emerges out of chaos. And so, but I'm looking at it from, let's see, self-organization occurs, the set of physical forces or constraints absolutely independent of scale of specific interactive forces in short space on habits. But how? Well, yeah, I mean, again, and just I'll just kind of leave it there, but at the idea that how synergetics is a complete system and looking at that and evaluating the actual macrocosm and microcosm as it actually had stated. So it's able to spot patterns within that idea of spontaneous order.
Cool. Joe, do you want to tell us how you're feeling and what your takeaways are?
I'm feeling pretty good, actually. I thought it was a really good discussion. It's the type of discussion that I think that that really kind of pushes us because we didn't necessarily see something the same way, and through dialogue, I think I had a better understanding of what you were saying with alignment in particular, which I do like. And the use of the word alignment, but also the idea of balance and how balance is often equated to just being static. And so, and I think that that's not necessarily accurate per se. But it doesn't encompass the whole concept. So anyway, that kind of dialogue is exactly what makes us think about what these words actually mean. And that's what Bucky was actually talking about, the meaningfulness of words in the beginning of the book, or Amy was talking about it, how Bucky was actually focused on that. So that was really kind of, I thought that was a very rich discussion, and I'm appreciative of it. And so it's something that I'll give it a little bit more thought to. Anne, how do you feel, and what do you take away from today?
Okay, today I was actually looking at the vector equilibrium, right? So the first portion of it before we went down to nature's own geometry. So he talked about vector. Okay, he talked about equilibrium at the beginning, and then he went on to vectors, right? So I was trying to grapple with, so what exactly then is vector equilibrium? I don't know what I'm going to discover at the end of the chapter, but I think I get now that, because I was thinking of vector as in being a line, right? But I think over and over again, when we've been discussing tetrahedron and the relationships, right? And realize that vectors then can be relationships. It can also be direction and movement. Correct me if I'm wrong, huh? So
Right.
yeah, because when we looked at the temperature thing in the room, right? Cold air, warm air, and it starts to move. Then you have movement and direction, and then the other is relationship and what was the other one I said? I wrote it down somewhere. One is relationship, movement, and direction. Okay, so then when you look at that, then seeking equilibrium in these three areas, I can see the vector equilibrium. So I was just trying to come to terms with what it actually means, having read the two sections of it. Yeah. And just to put it out there, in case I don't mention it, this 3 months I'm traveling to a different country each month, and therefore, okay, we're taking our entrepreneur competition into Jakarta. So mid-month, I'm going to Jakarta. Next month, very likely, we'll probably be going to Japan for our environmental program that we're working together with a Japanese alternative energy company, right? Then, of course, April, of course, is going to Canada. So that could impact me coming in and out again. So I will have to apologize in advance for that. Okay. And Steve, Richard, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway today?
Just before, Richard, before you start, I put the definition for vector in the chat. A vector is an object that has both magnitude and direction. Magnitude has to do with mass. And anyway, geometrically, we can picture a vector as a direct line segment whose length is the magnitude of the vector, and an arrow indicating the direction of the vector. The direction of the vector is from its tail to its head. It's moving towards the arrow. And then I'm listing 10 types of vectors. There's a zero vector, a unit vector, a position vector, a co-initial vector, like and unlike vectors, co-planar vectors, collinear vectors, equal vectors, displacement vectors, and negative of a vector. All these vectors are extremely important in different concepts of mathematics and higher level science. And I'm going to put the source for that information right there so that you can get it. So we're just basically
You've just given me a reason for my headache.
I just gave you a headache.
You've just given me a reason for my headache.
Yeah. We're just dipping our toes into vectors. So thank you for letting me interrupt. Richard, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Or I did mean it, and I apologize. Go ahead.
Well, I'm feeling quite good about this discussion, and I was about to go back to vector equilibrium in terms of the physical model of it that takes you from that icosahedron down into the octahedron and the tetrahedron and right down to a triangle. And it's but what what struck me just now as we were talking is the name itself, vector equilibrium. And so it's an equilibrium of vectors or edges or relationships. Um, and I think when we understand it in terms of a vector equilibrium, that's another way of saying it's a dynamic sort of fluctuating kind of equilibrium, because when you see the physical model of the vector equilibrium toy or the jitterbug, it's constantly moving and torquing. It's all those motions that you were talking about earlier, Steve. So by definition, vector equilibrium is not static balance. And that didn't register for me until these last two minutes when I went back to the name itself, vector equilibrium, and realized vector is all about edges, and then not only about edges, but it's also about direction and magnitude and lengths, a frequency. So that's my big takeaway is to recognize vector equilibrium as being a interconnection equilibrium. And if it's a two-way between two nodes, then the formula is applied in a slightly modified way. So you take the denominator of 2 off, and you get to see a real sort of feel, you get a real feel for the complexity of human relationships and what's going on between all the different ways they're communicating. And especially if you take what Steve was talking about, take the 7 energies and put them with somebody else's 7 energies and then get them crisscrossing. And I think the other thing is that you discover that all of these interconnections are not alive at the same time. They could be dormant and silent, and they're not necessary, but the potential is there for all of them to be interacting with each other. I think that's to me the really important thing to understand, that it's not just me, one person relating to another person. It could be my 7 interrelating with your 7. And as soon as I know the number of possible interconnections between those 14 really, then I have a lot more respect for the challenge, the complexity, the difficulty, the rabbit trails that one could go down, the return to listening to each other in a different kind of way. So it really gives one a totally different appreciation for the difference between sort of a simple notion of 2 or more people interconnecting with each other, and what it really means in terms of the complexity of all the parties and the possible interconnections between them in their learning patterns, their directional patterns, their whatever reason they're together patterns. Yeah. So thank you all. And Steve, and how are you feeling, and what's your takeaway?
Gosh, I'm feeling a little emotional. I was 75 years old, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've been on these calls maybe for 4 or 5 years. I don't know, Ann, I think you were here before me with Kelly and others. We have more on our Wednesday call than we do here. But I was 75 years old, I would say, anecdotally, before I even knew what vector was or even cared. And it just seems to me it's such a profoundly significant concept that everything has momentum, everything has magnitude, mass and momentum, magnitude, and everything has a direction. And I put in the chat over here about a 0 vector, because actually the nodes in a tetrahedron, the edges we know as vectors, but actually the nodes on the tetrahedron are vectors. They're 0 vectors. They're a vector where A and B is the same place, and a 0 on a vector page shows a 0-point vector. It's a beginning place of some equilibrium somehow, or the ending place.
Wow.
And so it's profound to me that how significant these concepts are. And boy, Anne, if you can, boy, if my brain, if I'd had Google, and now with AI answering questions the way it's doing, and even more, Gemini's getting better, Copilot, if I'd had these things when I was a kid, man, there'd be no holding me down. And I feel, whoa, you've got an atomic bomb there. Every class is 30 atomic bombs. Whoa. And to try to get them to, I love what Richard said about having total chaos. If things are not chaotic, there's no learning going on. And I think that, the degree of chaos can indicate the degree of learning. Even if we're learning, we don't have to do what the teacher says. We're learning something. But so I'm just so honored to be here. I love everybody's input. Joe, your balance sheet thing nailed it for me because I hated the word balance, and now I'm going to be very careful when I hear the word. I'm going to be ready for the balance sheet argument because it's so appropriate. It's so cool. I love the way we synergize together. I love our sharing. I'm feeling really grateful, and I thank you, all of you. And Richard, I hope you get your camera fixed because it's fun watching you squirm, and it's fun watching you get excited when certain conversations are being had. Okay, we made good progress today. We're 1 minute past the top of the hour, and life is good. Any other comments or questions before we close her down?
No, it's just one clarification is that I was just going to put in the chat is that the idea how balance could be both static and dynamic, and I kind of said I kind of misquoted that in my closing.
Okay, are you complete with that?
I'm complete now.
Good. All right, I love it. See you all when we see you all.
Yep.
Bye
See you
now.
Wednesday.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Later.